Center. It's very exciting to have so many familiar faces, some of whom we've seen recently, some of whom we haven't seen in a very long time. And we're very excited to see everyone. We hope that Bezrat Hashem, as things continue, and things should continue, that people should feel safe and comfortable being out and about in Yerushalayim Yer HaKodesh. And we'll see more and more friendly faces as we slowly and strategically bring back many of the familiar programs and exciting and well-loved activities of the OU Israel Center. My name is Rabbi Sam Shor, and I have the great zechut of being the program director here at the OU Israel Center. And among the many great benefits and responsibilities that I have is the opportunity to interact with so many important personalities, Torah personalities, and influential Torah personalities. And for me personally, at the top of that list, on a personal level, is our speaker this evening, Moran of Rabbi Adler. Rabbi Adler, for even before I got to the OU Israel Center, I lived for 7.5 years in Katamon, where Rabbi Adler is a respected member of the rabbinic community, and as a younger, I won't call myself a young rabbi anymore, but as a younger and more recent English-speaking rabbi immigrant to Yerushalayim, Rabbi Adler not only became a sought-after mentor and professional mentor and colleague, but he became to our family our personal rabbi. And to this day, that relationship has only developed further in our professional relationship here at the OU. And to this day, Rabbi Adler, whenever I call him, we have a standard conversation that begins every correspondence we have. I say, Rabbi, do you have a minute for me? And Rabbi Adler responds, for you, Sam, I have more than just a minute. So it's a great zechut for us to be able to host this exciting event. Of course, we all know that Rabbi Adler is a Talmud Mufak, a beloved and devoted student of Moran of Rabbeinu, Rav Yosef Halevi Soloveitchik, Zecher Tzadik V'Kol Shivracha. And this beautiful book that Rabbi Adler has brought to the world speaks of that relationship in a most personal way, telling beautiful stories and Torah learning that was experienced by Rabbi Adler in the private time that he had together with Rav Soloveitchik in the commute between yeshiva and the airport. And it's a fantastic sefer. We'll hear more about the sefer later this evening. Our first speaker though this evening, which is also a great zechut, to have with us, is he here with us online? To have with us Rabbi Yosef Adler. Rabbi Yosef Adler, of course, the Rabbi Emeritus of the Congregation of Rinat Yisrael in Teaneck, New Jersey, and the senior Rosh Yeshiva of TABC, okay, the Yeshiva, the Talmudic Academy of Bergen County. And Rabbi Yosef Adler is also one of the distinguished Talmidim and dedicated Talmidim of Rav Soloveitchik. Rabbi Yosef Adler, of course, also had the zechut, much like our own Rabbi Aaron Adler, to serve as the Rav's Shamash. And we have the great zechut to welcome virtually, which we'll see Rabbi Adler, he's not with us on the screen behind us, Rabbi Yosef Adler. Just a reminder, please, that before I pass the baton virtually over to Rabbi Adler, to please check that our cell phones are on silent, please. And also, immediately following the entire evening, we'll make a minyan from ours. So we ask men to please not disappear, to stay with us so we can make a minyan from ours. Without further ado, Rabbi Yosef Adler. Yeah, I'll do it, please.
This is a wonderful opportunity for my brother to record accurately, and I emphasize accurately, events that took place driving the Rav from YU to LaGuardia Airport and from LaGuardia Airport back to Yeshiva. And today's parsha is the most appropriate, the second of the two parshiyot scheduled to be read this Shabbat is Parshat Mas'eh. So just a short thought, and then I'll have some personal remarks about the whole idea behind the book. The Torah states, Eile Mas'eh B'nei Yisrael Asher Yatzu Me'eretz Mitzrayim V'Tzivotam B'yad Moshe V'Aaron. The Torah is going to enumerate all of the stops that Am Yisrael engaged in as they traveled throughout 40 years in the desert. Vayichtov Moshe et Motza'ehem L'Mas'ehem. Moshe wrote their goings according to their journeys. Al Pi Hashem. Ve'eile Mas'ehem L'Motza'ehem. And these were the journeys according to their going forth. So the word Motza'ehem, going forth, and Mas'ehem, journeys, are reversed. Moshe the first time says, Vayichtov Moshe Motza'ehem L'Mas'ehem Al Pi Hashem. And then it says, Ve'eile Mas'ehem L'Motza'ehem. Why is it reversed? And one can simply state that the first time that it appears, at Motza'ehem L'Mas'ehem Al Pi Hashem, is that going out, not remaining in the very same place, is a natural tendency amongst people. We often get bored by staying in one location, and I can just imagine, actually it's hard to imagine, that Am Yisrael stayed almost 20 years in Kadesh, in the city of Kadesh, 20 years. And that's 20 to 40 years traveling in the desert was at one location. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not designate the Hanan to move at all during those 20 years. It would have been a little frustrating. But when you travel around, when you try to explore, as long as the message is L'Mas'ehem Al Pi Hashem, in accordance with your journeys through the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as long as you keep in mind that you are traveling, exploring, looking for new vistas and ideas for the purpose of traveling to Eretz Yisrael based on the command of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then you'll find that then the problem is Ve'eile Mas'ehem L'Motza'ehem. Sometimes their travels were not guided Al Pi Hashem, but their travels, their journeys were done just L'Motza'ehem, just to get out, just to look for something else. And from time to time, you come across visit my brother and I had the good fortune that our father, Zefania Levracha, traveled with us to hear the Rav on a variety of occasions. We were students in high school at the Common Simcha of Borough Park on 49th Street between 8th and 9th Avenue. It was more of a yeshivish orientation. And during our sophomore year, my Rabbi's freshman year, my father took us to hear the Rav. The very first time, it was at a Mizrahi convention in the Lido Beach Hotel. The hotel was packed, there were no seats available. I remember we sat on the radiator sometime in November, but the Rav was the honorary president of Mizrahi, and he often spoke at this convention, and some of these drashot became part of a book collected called The Four Drashot, or in Yiddish, The Fear Drashot. That's what it was, because the shiurim were given in Yiddish, or Arba Drashot. Then he added a fifth one, a fifth presentation. We went as well every Tuesday night to hear the Rav in Moria on 18th Street and Broadway. There was a shul on the second level in which the Rav gave a rubber share for an hour and a half hour on Parshas HaShavua. But it was not the Parshas HaShavua of the coming week, it was the Parshas HaShavua of the previous week. And the Rav always said, I am not going to spoon feed 300 drushes to Shabbos. If you can remember it from next year, find it then. So we went there, we traveled to Washington Heights to attend the Rav's Yahrzeit share for his father's in front of the Rabbi, and eventually then for his wife as well. Upward of 2,000 people would come to that lecture. We would go to the Americana hotels and then to the Lexington Avenue Y in Manhattan to hear the Tshuva Drasha of the Rav every single year between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And then we traveled to Boston. I don't know if Rabbi did, but I traveled to Boston at the end of the summer. They had a Yarfei Kala where the Rav did shiurim in Maimonides school for 3 days on the topic of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. So Mas'ei or Mas'eihem was something that our father and uncle, Rabbi Aaron Ziegler, he should live May of Esra in good health, often took us to hear the Rav, and we were real Hasidim of the Rav. Even though the Rav didn't have Hasidim, and we didn't treat the Rav like we treat Shereka, but we had that opportunity, and it was something special. It was really something special. And one thing that there were lots of people who've printed books and often spoken about the Rav or what he did, and I emphasized in my opening words that my brother and I were very loyal to accurately portray what the Rav had said. Some people were less than accurate and would often, twist certain things around. And we were delighted. We were recognized that we have a responsibility that if we quote it, it should be something that we actually heard, not fabricated, and that we quoted accurately, which certainly in this book, Vayikra Soha Aron, is something that stands out. I'm familiar with a lot of the episodes, and can certainly tell you that Rav Aaron, transmitted it appropriately. It's a great zechus to be able to do something to spread Todat Harav. I had an opportunity myself to put together a Haggadah with a lot of the Rav's Torah, and I was careful myself if other members of the family had already produced the Haggadah called Siach Yitzchak Lichtenstein. I didn't put that into my Haggadah. My brother was the same way. He tried to limit things to where he made a contribution. It's not that rehashing and regurgitating other stories. So I am delighted to participate in the book launch of this particular sefer. And there are people in my shul who I've encouraged to buy the sefer, and they said they couldn't put it down. It was so interesting. And I just hope that people will receive the book well and understand what the purpose is, to paint our Rabbi as not only an outstanding Talmid Chacham and an incredible, phenomenal Magichir, but the human being that he was. The care and sensitivity to other people's needs that are demonstrated in so many of the stories of my brother. And thank you again for coming, and I look forward to hearing everybody's remarks tonight.
Our next speaker described as the keynote speaker for this evening, besides Rabbi Adler, of course, is Rachel Soloveitchik. Rachel Soloveitchik is the op-ed and Judaism editor of Arutz Sheva, and a well-known lecturer and personality in the Anglo-Jerusalem world. And it's a great zechut to welcome her. And I believe Rachel actually wrote a very glowing, what do we call it, review of the book. And we're delighted to hear from her this evening.
We will see if this works. I don't think it will work. It's actually Rachel Soloveitchik Tabak, but we said Soloveitchik, which is okay. As you'll hear later, I can understand why. Do you hear me? Okay. First of all, Erev Tov. I can't believe I see a room full of people. I think I want to say Shefiano, but I don't know. The Rabbi has to tell me when I'm allowed to. First of all, thank you for coming. It's really an honor, Rabbi Adler, and I'm getting some of the crumbs of that by being able to talk. And I want to thank the Achsanya and Rabbi Shor, and also Rabbi Adler's brother for his inspiring words. So, I want to take us to Melachim Bet, Perek Bet, where Eliyahu takes leave of his disciple Elisha. ויהי בהעלות השם את אליהו בסערה השמיים, וילך אליהו ואלישע מן הגלגל. Eliyahu and Elisha walked together, continuing towards Beit El. They crossed the Jordan. Every minute is precious. Eliyahu asks what Elisha would like. Here's his request. And then the text simply says, ויהי המה הולכים הלוך ודבר. And they were walking and talking. And that is when the chariot descended to take Eliyahu. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could know what it is they talked about? Because the conversations with tzaddikim, then and now, from time immemorial, are lessons in how to live a life of Torah. But it seems to me, not just to me, that it was not only conversations. There's a deeper and somewhat strange message found in the very next chapter of Melachim, in Perek Gimel. The king Yehoshaphat, accompanied by the king of Israel and the king of Edom, are in a military operation. Operation is the operational word nowadays. Every war in Gaza is called an operation, so I decided to say operation. Against Moab, asks for a Navi. And the king's servants answer, here is Elisha ben Shaphat, who poured water on the hands of Eliyahu. Po Elisha ben Shaphat, asher yatzak mayim al yedei Eliyahu. Is that how Elisha is known? Not as a student, not as a prophet, not as someone who walked and conversed with Eliyahu Navi, but as a man who poured water so Eliyahu could wash his hands? The Gemara asks this question in Bavli, Masechet Brachot Daf Zayin Amud Bet. And it says, I shortened it, so if you know it by heart in English, you'll be missing a few words here and there. And Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rashbi, serving a Talmid Chacham is greater than learning from him. It's a famous saying, but it is deduced from this, from the fact that in recommending Elisha to the king as a prophet, the king's entourage did not say Elisha, the student of Eliyahu Navi, which is what we would expect, but Elisha, who served him. Lamad lo ne'emar, it says in the Gemara, ela yatzak, melamed shegdola shimusha yoter miliyuda. And Rav Kook discusses this in Einaya al Brachot, and I translated him freely and probably very badly, so we'll just listen to what I wrote. Because it is, I didn't know how much of the audience knows Hebrew, so I translated everything. Because it is a Torah Chaim, the Torah's main purpose is for us to know how to act in life in line with its values and ideals. And since the elevated traits of holy man, who is Daved B'Torah, cannot be explained verbally, and even less than that in writing, Only an eye that observes his holy ways will gain the wisdom to realize the influence of Torah on the great men who love Torah with dvekus. I could not translate dvekus. If someone knows how to translate that, tell me. That is why serving a Talmid Chacham is greater than learning with him, because he sees the Rab's holy ways with his own eyes. This evening is dedicated to the book 70 Conversations in Transit, which grants us the next best thing to seeing Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik Zatzal's actions with our own eyes. We have the privilege of knowing what his driver disciple, Rav Aaron Adler, saw, what the Rav and he talked about and experienced during a weekly 20-minute drive that went on for 3 years, bringing the Rav from LaGuardia Airport to the yeshiva. The book is aptly subtitled. It says, Vayihi bin Soh Ha'aron, a play on the name Aharon from Rav Aaron Adler. The car is akin to the Aron, and the Rav akin to the Luchot that were in it during the times of the Mikdash, and today to the Sefer Torah inside it. And in the review of the book that I wrote on Rosh Sheva, that triggered a memory, because when Rav Avram Shapira, the late chief rabbi of Israel, when he visited Yeshiva University, he heard a shir in the Beis Medrash, which was also shul of the Rav. And as the shir ended, Rav Shapira got up, his diminutive self, and went up and kissed the Rav. On the way, he said in Yiddish, "It's a mitzvah to kiss the Sefer Torah." And when asked afterwards why he said that, he said, because one is not supposed to kiss anyone in shul, not even one's own children, but one must kiss the Sefer Torah. And that's why he did it. The value of conversing with the Gadol Hador, of serving the Gadol Hador, is learned from Elisha. But there's more. Although we do not know the content of Elisha's conversations, we have a Talmudic source for using the proximity to a Talmid Chacham to ask halachic questions, to strive for practical applications of halacha in real time, and to observe how he reaches a psak. And that's what Rabbi Adler did. And he has a precedent, he has many, but I'm bringing one. In Bava Metzia, Kaf Dalet Amud Bet, it says, again my translation, Rava would follow Rabbi Nachman, even in the shuk of leather workers, and ask him questions, like, if I find a wallet here, what is its status? And Rabbi Nachman would answer, it's yours. Not in those words exactly. Rabbi continues to ask, if a Jew comes and gives me identifying signs for the wallet, what is its status? And Rabbi Nachman replies, in that case, it belongs to him. The Rav and Rav Adler talked of everything, of prenatal testing, vacuum cleaner bags for Pesach, black kosher meat, saying the Hagomel blessing after air travel, saying Amen after Birkat Hagomel, yes or no, for just a few pertinent examples in the vein of Rabbi, who did the same as Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Adler observed how strictness versus leniency within the halachic framework, always within the framework. Rav Soloveitchik was as much of a mathematical thinker as he was a halachic genius, took social and human factors into account. He took them into account when he made a halachic decision, as well as when he dealt with the non-observant people he spoke to. And Rabbi Adler saw the Rav's incisive analysis on women's education and on all kinds of other pressing issues. But as Rav Kook explained, the most important value of Shimusha is that Rabbi Adler observed the Rav's behavior from close, sometimes asking the reasons for it, and sometimes just observing. And that too has Talmudic precedent. Here's one. It's a long one, so I've abridged it. In Ta'anit Kaf Gimel, it says that the sages sent two of their colleagues to Abba Chilkiah. This is a famous story. Many of you know it. Grandson of Choni HaMa'agel, to ask him to pray for rain. First they came to his house, but he wasn't there. So they went to the field and found him stooped over his work, digging up the earth. They greeted him respectfully, but he paid them no attention. When he finished his work, they followed him to his house. And they noticed, they observed, that when he had finished working, he threw his coat over one shoulder, while he placed a bundle of wood in his spade on the other. They thought it strange. It would have been much more comfortable to put the things on top of the coat as padding. There were more surprises in store. Abba Chokia had taken off his shoes and tied them to his belt and was walking barefoot. But when they had to cross a shallow stream, he put his shoes on and waded through the water with his shoes on. And obviously his mother was not nearby, but that's my addition, okay? When they had to pass through a thicket of thorny bushes, he lifted up his garments so the thorns scratched his skin. When they reached his home, and Abba Chokia and his family sat down to eat, he did not invite the guests to join him. Distributing cakes to his children, Abba Chokia gave the older one 1 cake and gave the younger one 2. Well, the rain came, and I'm skipping that part about how it happened, and the sages said to him, "Now that the rain has come, we have nothing to ask you except to explain your actions to us. Why didn't you acknowledge our greeting in the field?" You can hear me, right?
Yeah.
So, and Abba Chokia replied, "I had hired myself out for a day's work. The time was not mine, not even a minute of it, not even a second to say hello. I had no right to make conversation with you and interrupt my work. Why did you put your coat on one shoulder and the wooden spade on the other?" "Because," he said, "the coat was a borrowed one. I borrowed it to wear it for warmth, not to use it as padding for carrying wood or tools." "So why did you walk barefoot on dry land and put on your sandals to wade through the water?" "I wanted to save my shoes' wear. I could be barefoot while walking on dry land, for I could see what I was treading on. But there's no way of telling what I might step on in the water." "Why did you lift up your clothes while walking through the thorns and let your skin be scratched?" "Because," he said, "scratches on the skin heal, but a torn garment will not heal." "Why did you not invite us to break bread with you?" "Because there was not enough food to go around, and though I knew you would refuse to eat and say thank you to me, I didn't want to get thank you for nothing." "So why did you give your oldest son 1 cake and the 2 to the younger one?" "Because the older one stays home. If he gets hungry, he can ask for food. The younger one, however, goes to school." This is a much longer story than I've told you, and I think the point is that every action of a gadol has meaning, has a cause, has been thought out, is not random. And that must be what being a gadol means, beyond being a gadol b'limud. Rabbi Adler, shibadel l'chaim arokim, and my late husband Dov Zal were good friends. Interestingly, Dov, the founding dean of Amuna College, actually drove Rabbi Adler, who was the Nasi of the college, to the Michlala every day. I'm not expecting a book. And I therefore want to interject a story showing that Rav Kook's words about Shimusha apply across the board. Dov had learned at NTJ with Rav Moshe Feinstein and told me that there was a contest, rivalry to walk Rav Feinstein Zatzal to and from his home to the yeshiva. So the students who wanted to do so made a list, to be fair. In later years, he was driven by Marcy Tabak, actually, Smith. She later became Tabak. This is younger years. Dov took him one Shabbat morning. Now, I am an East Sider, so I remember well where Rabbi Feinstein lived. And when you walked down Henry Street, you went down to East Broadway, and then you walked and walked and walked and walked and got to MTJ. You walked. But something strange happened. He said that Rabbi Feinstein would walk along one side of East Broadway, then cross over to the other side, walk a little bit for a few minutes, and then cross back with him. When Dov seemed surprised, Dov was from Connecticut, so he didn't really know too much about the area, Rav Feinstein explained that he crossed over when they were opposite the Young Israel of the Lower East Side because he was well aware that some of his students were davening there instead of in the yeshiva, and he did not want to embarrass them. What a lesson for educators. Rabbi Adler served as a role model for my son Avi and guided him with much sage advice on learning decisions early on, including becoming a Talmud of Rav Shapira and Rav Ilson. Avi told me once that it was Rabbi Adler's reverence for the Rav, who of course Avi never knew, that led him to understand the meaning of and the need for a Selech HaRav, and that he should aspire to that. Thus, Avi, who later married Rabbi Abraham Shapiro, Zatzal's eldest granddaughter, would often accompany the Rosh Yeshiva of Merkaz Harav and talk and learn with him because of you. This was my chance to say thank you, so I put it in. One of the many experiences he related to us is that when Rav Shapiro went to Beit Tuvei Ayir for Pesach, the rabbi of the place was a very young man, just starting the rabbi. When they davened Arvit, Avi was right next to Rav Shapiro, and he saw that Rav Shapiro had finished Shmoneh Esrei but didn't step back. Rav said Shalom b'Ramah. Avi stood right next to him, and Rav Shapiro always davened from a siddur. He would say Birkat HaMazon from Venture, and Chazarat HaShatz, he didn't lift his head, so I've been told. So Avi could see that he had finished, but nobody else could, because he was still holding the siddur. When the young Rav finished davening the Amidah, Rav Shapiro stepped back. To Avi, who noticed and asked him later, he said that if he could be seen to finish before the young Rav, the Shliach Tzibur would have started Kaddish right away, continued davening right away, and that would be a lack of kavod for this young Rav. And we are talking about a Rav who could have been his grandson, age-wise. These two stories that I interjected are glimpses, but in Rabbi Adler's book, we get much more than a glimpse. And while driving the Rav, he noticed everything. He writes perceptively of the Rav's ways by telling how the Rav asked to be driven to his father's grave on his father's yurtzeit. Well, this was an exception to the family tradition which followed the Vilna Gaon's custom of not visiting graves. He tells us how Rabbi Herschel Schachter explained the Rav's weekly visit later to his own beloved wife's grave, Tanya, and how the Rav said Tillin at Rabbi Belkin's bedside in a very moving moment in the book, the way that is written, before he passed away. He learns about the value of scrupulous honesty as the Rav refunds a nickel. Rav Soloveitchik refunds a nickel to someone. He insists on paying the tolls and parking with his own money, and how the Rav cares about people's feelings in choosing the way he answers questions. He writes of the Rav's pride in his grandson's IDF service, of his calling the IDF uniform Bigdei Kodesh, when he was asked about whether an Israeli soldier needs to change into freshly laundered clothes to daven. He said they were Bigdei Kodesh and there was no need. This brings us to what Rabbi Adler adds to our knowledge of the Rav's attitude to religious Zionism, which, since we're in Yerushalayim, I decided I have to mention. As head of Mizrahi and the author of Kol Dogido Fake, which is mandatory reading in religious Israeli high schools, it is clear, as Rabbi Adler writes, that he had a very positive outlook on the Jewish state and Aliyah. Rabbi Adler's discussions with the Rav about his pending Aliyah, I will leave for the reader to ponder on. You have to read them, as the questions are still highly relevant, and they included reservations about filling the needs of congregations of Chutz La'aretz, which the Rav did not call diaspora. He made a point of calling it galut, so it would not be a positive, semi-intellectual word. The Rav did not make decisions for his students on personal matters, among them Aliyah, so he did not give Rabbi Adler a definitive answer. It's a very difficult question. One has to decide between personal aspirations, such as moving to Israel, along with the fact that Israel needs Olim, and the needs of Galut Jews if you're a rabbi, especially young adults in Chutz La'aretz, who need guidance. Torah Mitzion, by the way, is an effort to provide answers to that. It sends Zionistic Torah scholars to strengthen the congregations of Chutz La'aretz and also give role models for Aliyah. It seems to work. A similar question can be raised about moving to Yehuda and Shomron, actually, in order to hold on to and build Eretz Yisrael. But moving much of the religious Zionist population out of the cities leaves them bereft of religious Zionist families. And the Garanim Toraniyim and Rav Micha Halevi's projects in Tel Aviv are an attempt to deal with that. I'm just giving these examples to show you that it's not a simple answer for a rabbi. But it is fascinating to read that part of the book, where the Rav discusses the issue with his driver. Rabbi Adler does talk about public and national Zionist issues, such as Hallel on Yom HaAtzmaut. He writes that the Rav felt the Israeli chief rabbinate was Mara the Asra with regard to that, but that did not make blanket recognition of the chief rabbin's purview a simple matter. The jury is out on why he did not run for chief rabbi, as he gave various answers for that refusal. Rabbi Adler brings the one he feels is accurate. There's also a, I'm sure it's apocryphal, Ben-Gurion story that goes around the Israeli Zionist yeshivas, which one of my grandsons told me. I'm really quite sure it's not true. That Ben-Gurion went to Rabbi Soloveitchik and said to him, I want you to be the chief rabbi of Israel. And Rabbi Soloveitchik said, well, that is a great compliment. I'm just not sure you're the person who should be recommending who the chief rabbi of Israel should be. So I find it hard to believe this happened, but I've heard it. It's not in the book. Especially poignant is where the Rabbi cuts through the political and rabbinic issues of all kinds and describes the crux of what religious Zionism and perhaps all true Zionists are about. I'm going to take a minute to read that to you from the book. If I find it. I will never forget the evening in 1935 when I visited Rabbi Zeb Gold in Ramat Gan in Eretz Israel. He took me out to the orange groves near his house. It was a beautiful sight. The sky was perfectly blue and there were endless stars. From afar we could see the lights of the new all-Jewish city of Tel Aviv, glistening in the dark. The lights were telling us the thrilling and intoxicating news of the rebuilding of the Holy Land. As we stood there, Rav Gold picked up a small pebble and kissed it, to fulfill Rav Abba's dictum in the Talmud that he would kiss the rocks of Akko in Knubot. That night, the Rav says, I thought to myself how insignificant I was compared to this special Jew who was able to experience the glory of Hashem through the grandeur of the landscape of Eretz Israel. Reading the book, I was struck by another point that made these one-on-one conversations with Rav Soloveitchik even more special. And that is the vast, vast difference between the Rav in New York and in Boston. Interestingly, Dr. Yitzchak David Goldberg, who is a professor of clinical radiation oncology at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, sent me an article for Rosh Sheva several years ago called Walking with the Rav, which he wrote for the Rav's 26th Yortzeit. But I looked for it and found it. He writes, on the weekends, at his home in Brookline, the Rav was approachable by all the members of his community. A unique highlight on Shabbat was the opportunity to accompany the Rav on his walk to and from the Maimonides School synagogue. People would look out the window and appear as if by chance at the right moment and join the walk. He describes David, a young, energetic, and tenured professor of mathematics at Al-Shula at Harvard University from Russia, on the Rav's right. And on his left, Yudit, an intellectually challenged teen, who would run up to them, and the Rav would clasp her right hand with his own. He writes, it was intellect on his right and chesed on his left. And all of them listening to the Rav's words all the way to shul, and learning from his words and learning from his ways. But in New York, in his capacity as Rosh Yeshiva, Yeshiva University of New York, the Rav was mostly accessible intellectually just to his students, and only intellectually. As Rabbi Adler adds, it was a Rosh Yeshiva posture. His very presence in New York, in and out of YU confines, was surrounded by an awe-inspiring spirit of tension. There was always a perceptible distance. The New Yorkers were jealous of the Bostonians, how they wished they could join them on that Shabbat walk. But Rabbi Adler, following in the footsteps of Elisha, Rava, and the sages who came to Abba Chokia, walking, serving, learning halacha, and absorbing behavioral guidance, each of these clearly delineated in the 5 headings in his book, had the zchut that comes from Shimusha. He had an opportunity to see the Rav's holistic way of living Torah, as Rav Kook wrote in Einaya. As for me, a New Yorker, the I certainly never spoke to the Rav. The impression of him I had was of a walking intellect, a source of Piskei Halacha. On a personal vein, when I graduated TI, Beit Rosh Loremot of Yeshiva University, I was a valedictorian. But I was also in the Shnat Evel for my mother, Aleh Shalom. And Rav Soloveitchik was posek. They obviously went to ask him, the principal went to ask him that I could not attend the graduation. I could not march, and I could not speak in front of the kahal. He was very machmer on a bailiff. It sounds really hard, but I welcomed it, because I was in a bailiff for my mother. And I think it would have been a very hard thing to do. Instead, I came, and they took my picture and my cap and gown outside the grounds, and it was in the paper, and I went home. And that was one distant contact with Rav Soloveitchik for me, aside from my husband, and of course his brilliant shiurim. But I also know of his kindness, because my brother, Olav Shalom Zalman, who learned in Torah Vodas and not in YU, went to him about adopting the child because his wife had been in Auschwitz as a teen and couldn't have children. And he always spoke of how the Rebbe was so understanding. So I knew a brilliant intellect. My brother knew and a posek I knew, and my brother knew the softness, and Rabbi Adler knew both. Reading the book, it's clear that the Rabbi was a role model of ethical and moral behavior, as Rabbi Adler writes. How wonderful to read the Rab's thoughts on the subject and see how he deals with incidents on a one-by-one basis, to admire his gentlemanly demeanor and savor also his quick repartee. How lucky we are that Rabbi Adler was cognizant of this unique opportunity, that he prepared for these trips, would write down 10 subjects and try to bring up 2 or 3 of them, was careful to write down these conversations after each trip, and how thankful we are that he published this book, written with humility and awe, love and appreciation for one of the greatest Torah figures in Jewish history. There are many, many books on the shelves with the Rav's thoughts. And when one hears somebody, as we heard at the beginning of this evening, saying what he thinks the Rav thought, would have said, or what, read the books and find out what he really said. I recommend Zeh Sinai. I only read it in Hebrew, but I imagine it's from English. But what Rabbi Adler has granted us is not only the Rav's thoughts, but an unforgettable glimpse into the Rav's way of life. Thank you.
So it is my great zchut to introduce Lorena Rabbeinu, Rabbi Dr. Aaron Adler.
Erev Tov. I actually did not believe we were going to have a minion here.
That wasn't one of my words.
You know, the center wisely offered a Zoom option at the very, very last minute, and I know there are people online, so good evening to you as well, and good afternoon to those from the States who are online at this time as well. I want to thank my brother, Rabbi Yosef Adler, for saying his wonderful and kind words. One of the best things I heard tonight from my brother is that he called me Rav Aaron. I've never, ever heard that before in my life. So Yossi, shkoyach. And the book is dedicated to my brother. I have my wife's permission on that one, by the way, because my brother was the Rav's Shamus, and I describe in the book, after Rebbetzin, the Rav's wife passed away in '67, the Rav needed assistance in New York City to help him get around, and there was a corps of shamashim that developed. The early ones were Bostonians and then moved on. And my brother had a chavruta, Mark Karasik, who was the Rav Shamus, and he passed the baton over to my brother. And I recall the September morning in 1974 where he calls me up and he asked me if I'd like to drive the Rav. And I said yes. I hung up and I basically fainted. Because you have to understand what this means. Two things. One is, I'm not exaggerating by saying that the Rav could have been a chavruta of the Rambam. Let's just say a junior partner. But nevertheless, that is quite an assessment. To think that the Rav could have been on some level with the Rambam. And certainly with many, many of the greats of the Rishonim and Achronim. There's no question about that. So that's one point that was obviously awesome. The other thing was to take a person who was the crown jewel of Torah, certainly in my family's life and for so many others, to drive him in a 1964 Chevy in 1974? But I did it. And it worked. And not only did it work, but one Tuesday morning when I looked out the window of my car, the car was stolen in Borough Park. And I called my brother quickly. I said, get somebody to LaGuardia because I can't make it. And I walked into Shir late, and the Rav looked at me and he said, Hamakom Yemalei Chesroncha. It sounds like Hamakom Yenachem. It's not a joke. The Talmud Yerushalmi says that a loss of a valuable object, you console a person because there's a real sense of loss. And the Rav felt that I had a real sense of loss, and he was right. My jalopy was the first car in the Adler family. So it was worth a lot to me, sentimentally. And the Rav said, Hamakom Yemalei Chesroncha. The next morning, I get a phone call from the police station in Brooklyn that I can come at 7 in the morning and pick it up. They found it. Some guy took it for a joyride. The ignition key was a little broken, but the car is there. And I knew the Rav was a malach. So Rachel began with the Gemara in Maseret Brachot about Gedolah Shimusha Yoter Limuda. The very, very first line, by the way, in the preface of the book. And there, the Rav spoke often, not only about Elisha, Paul Elisha ben Shafat, Asher Yatzak Mayim Eliyahu, being the principal student of Eliyahu Hanavi, but the Rav then spoke greatly about Yeshua ben Nun. Why exactly does Yeshua ben Nun become the next in charge? Lo yamish mitoch ha'oel. He never leaves the tent. Yeshua was a servant for Moshe Rabbeinu, and he saw him beyond the confines of a shir. And this certainly was the advantage that Yeshua had above and beyond all the others. But just the other week we read, just last Shabbat, in Parshat Pinchas, about the smicha that was given by Moshe Rabbeinu to Yeshua. And it says, "V'natata mehodcha alav." Some of your glory you should give over to Yeshua. And Rashi says on the spot, "Mehodcha v'lo kol hodcha." Not everything, but some of it. Melamed comes to teach you, "Nimtzim lemedim pnei Moshe k'pnei hachama, pnei Yeshua k'pnei halevana." Moshe was somehow equivalent to the sun, Yeshua equivalent to the moon. And normally understood and interpreted is this a concept of nitkatnu hadorot. With every passing generation, we take a little bit of a slide, a gradual slide. So if Moshe is the sun, Yeshua is the moon, you can imagine what the next generation would be. But the Rav said that's not what Chazal had in mind. The Rav said that the sun is a source of energy. It's a creative being. It gives off the energy. The moon is just dead rock. It doesn't do anything. It does not create any energy. So why is the moon important? Because it reflects the energy from the sun. It does not reflect all of the energy, and certainly the moonshine, doesn't even come close to sunshine. A student must see himself or herself as a levana. If you have such a towering Rebbe who's a shemesh, you have to know your place. You have to know that you're not there to talk about your great Rebbe by standing on his shoulders and projecting yourself as a great one as well. The Rebbe was the great one, he was the Shemesh. And what your job is to reflect that Torah on different levels. The Rav was a master of bringing Torah to different levels. So indeed, he spoke to his yeshiva students of 100+ students on the registry and over 20 yeshiva guests from other yeshivas in New York who came for the shir. So that was one level. And yes, he gave these public shiurim that were on a very, very high level. But he also spoke on university campuses occasionally. He also met people in different groups. He knew how to talk to people on their levels. He was a very versatile individual. He also had the ability to size up a crowd quickly enough and to speak on different frequencies to the same crowd, so that everybody walked out saying, I got a lot out of this. I may not have gotten everything, but I got a lot out of this. And that was a tremendous, tremendous talent that he had, and he tried to convey it to his students that they should cultivate that talent. Because as he always told me, what many times you have on a Aron Kodesh, Dal Lifnei Mi Ata Omeid, which means that you as the davener, you're davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you should know before whom you're standing. That's the classic usage of Dal Lifnei Mi Ata Omeid. The Rav said it has to do with every teacher and every rabbi standing before a crowd. Know your crowd. Dal Lifnei Mi Ata Omeid. And know your crowd well. In my own experiences in Chinuch, I have occasionally overshot and occasionally undershot, and I was always very, very fortunate when somebody pointed it out to me, because that was important. Don't worry about my feelings. Tell me so I don't do it again. I perhaps underestimated a particular group of people, and then you raise the level. Sometimes you overshoot, and you lose them. This was a great message that I gained from the Rav. The idea of dedicating to my brother has a lot to do with one of the 3 chumras that the Rav had. Now the Rav had chumras on a private level, chumras, stringent opinions. No question in his personal life, halachic life, there were many, many chumras in the Soloveitchik family. That we know. But when the Rav went public with certain statements and certain pronouncements, not always did you pick up that this was a machmir talking. Not always was the answer no. It's asur, it's forbidden. Sometimes he would explain to you why it's actually permissible. The Rav actually, his big chumras were not in Shabbat or in Avelut, although he was machmir in Avelut. We know that in Shabbat he actually was more mekeli. He knew how to figure things out that would make it somewhat more accommodating for people on some level. The 3 big chumras, in my humble opinion, were hakarat hatov, showing appreciation, kvod habriot, respecting human dignity, and tzedakah. Now on tzedakah, I'm not going to tell you the whole story. It's a whole chapter of the book, but I will tell you that the Rav was a tremendous Baal tzedakah. You have to figure out how he got all his money to become a big Baal tzedakah, but he was a very, very big Baal tzedakah. And I had heard from the grapevine at that time at the yeshiva that the Rav was giving 60% of his holdings for tzedakah. And I had the chutzpah, and boy, this was chutzpah, to ask him in the car once, how does that, I said, Rabbi, I heard a rumor that the Rav gives 60% of his holdings for tzedakah. How does that sit with what the Rambam says? Now, it's not just the Rambam, it's the Gemara too, but you know, with the Rav always said, we all know that the Gemara came to explain the Rambam. We all know that. So I didn't quote the Gemara, I quoted the Rambam. The Rambam says, Al yibazbeis yoter michomesh. You have to give 10%, but you want to be very generous, don't give more than 20%. The word is yibazbeis. Modern Hebrew, it has a negative connotation. But 20% is the upper limit. You know, can 60% be true? Now the Rav could have ignored me completely. Or he could have just told me it's none of your business. He could have said something at that point. But what he told me was, you obviously forgot a pasuk in Sefer Kohelet. Oh really? Which pasuk? Ki adam ein tzadik ba'aretz asher ya'aseh tov v'lo yecheta. A man cannot go by life without having at least one sin. And I wouldn't want to make Shlomo HaMelech into a liar. So you have to have at least one sin. And then he follows up and he says, after 120 years, Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to whip out the indictment of overdosing on tzedakah. And I will smile. I remember what he told me. I will smile and say, guilty as charged. Guilty as charged. The Rav gave a ton of money to tzedakot. Private tzedakot and also institutional tzedakah. And the Rav was a big machmer on this. He was a big machmer on the Kvod Briot. I remember one of the things when I started in the rabbinate, it's a long time ago, right, 1977, in the congregation Sons of Israel in Long Island City, Astoria. There we go, okay. Wow, look at there. So it really existed. I actually planted them too. So the Rav, he gave me a private bracha. That was, I was actually finishing up at YU in my last tests of the Yardea, and this job came my way, and the people were willing to accept me, even though I had not yet finished the yeshiva, the smicha officially. So what they did was something rather smart, I felt. They wrote in the contract that should Rabbi Adler not complete the smicha requirements, we reserve the right to terminate the contract. I thought that was fine. That was fair. But I went to the Rav anyway for a personal smicha of sorts, because the Gemara says, Talmid al yoreh elen kein natal reshut merabo. A Talmud, a student, shouldn't render a halachic decision unless he has permission from his Rabbi. At that point, the Rav gave over to me what his father, Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, who was the Rav of Chaslovich, which was a little town in Belarus, and when he became the Rav of that town, so his father, the famous Reb Chaim, the Rav of Brisk, gave his son Rav Moshe a bracha. And the bracha was, Havei Mitunim Badin. Now, where's the bracha? That's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, of the Anshe Knesset Gdolah. And what the bracha was, that a rabbi has to understand that you have to be patient in the issues that you deal with. Don't make every issue into a federal case. Clearly differentiate what is an important and critical issue, and there you make your stand. And those issues where you just let it pass because it's just not worth it. And then he goes on to tell me that in 1932, when he had just arrived in Boston, did I say it right? Boston, right. So he was hired by a shul to be a shul rabbi, and it started on Rosh Hashanah. And that year Rosh Hashanah came out on Shabbat. Now, most of us remember that in Chutz La'aretz there's no Birkat Kohanim, Duchenim, except on Yom Tov. But there's some shuls that when there's Yom Tov on Shabbat, there's also no Birkat Kohanim. But the Rav felt that there should be Birkat Kohanim on Yom Tov, even if it falls out on Shabbat. So in that shul, Rosh Hashanah came out on Shabbat, the first day, and the Kohanim did not go up to Birkat Kohanim. And the Rav looks at the president of the shul and he says, why are the Kohanim going up? He said, well, our minhag here is that the Kohanim don't do it on Shabbat, on Yom Tov Shabbat. So the Rav says, no, the Kohanim should go up. And what ensued was a fight. And by the time Yom Kippur came around, he was fired. He was fired. So the Rav looked at me, and this is years later, right? 1977, 74, 75, 76, whatever. And the Rav tells me, he says, I was right, but boy, I was dead wrong. To give up the Rabbanis Hanaduchen on Shabbos, it wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth it. So don't make those kind of mistakes. And those are the kinds of advice that he was giving me on a practical level to serve in the rabbinate. And then he told me that whenever there's an appeal in the shul, and in the United States, so that's what they do, they make appeals, and in our Sons of Israel congregation, we had a monthly Sunday morning breakfast for something, some cause. So it was great, it was a great idea. Instead of having Shabbos Yom Tov appeal, so once a month, it could be whatever it was, and they had their pet projects that they would do. It would be Night Jewish appeal, it would be Israel Bonds, it would be this yeshiva, they always had a YU Shabbos. So I was able to squeeze in Yeshivat Haratzion, and I even got Rav Lichtenstein to come once to say a few words there. The Rav said, whatever your highest donor gives in your shul, match it. And then he says, check with your wife about this. So make sure she's in on this. But, he says, the Gemara says, aser ta aser, aser b'shvil shetit asher. It's not going to be written off as a loss. So, and this is the way you're going to educate for tzedakah. You won't have to give one sermon about giving tzedakah. When they see, in those days, if somebody gave $50 for an appeal, that was a lot of money. Most people were giving $25 and $18 checks. And if the highest donor in my shul, which didn't have multi-millionaires, but there's always somebody who's a little better off than others, was giving $250 for every appeal. So I said, all right, we're going to have to take off our Misa money and give $250 for every appeal. When people saw that, and they knew what I was earning, they were paying me. And they were all making more money than I was. So the $25 checks became $50 checks, and the $50 checks became $100 checks, and so on. It became a lesson in setting the example. It all came from the Rav. It all came from him. You know, here I'm telling the stories 45 years later. Bless Corona, I had time to do it. I didn't have real time for the last 45 years. But as my brother said, and I reiterate, I struggled for accuracy by consulting. If people were involved in the stories, I contacted them to see exactly if what I remembered and what I recalled is what they recalled. And you know what? It didn't always synchronize. And I had to work it out that everybody was happy with the story at the end of the day. So we weren't guilty of any type of fabrication. The title of the book, Vahi ben Soah Ha'aron, which is really the title, and 70 Conversations in Transit, was suggested by the publisher Urim of Tzvi Maurer fame and others who did a wonderful, wonderful job. That was suggested by the publisher because they said if it's going to be Vahi ben Soah Ha'aron, people are going to think it's a book on Mishkan artifacts. And so too, I actually paid some money for the beautiful picture of the Aron Brit from the Machon Mikdash, and I wanted it to be on the cover, and they said nobody's going to see this. They're going to think it's a Mishkan book or Beit HaMikdash book. But the publisher agreed to put it on the back because they saw I paid some money to get the picture. But what was the idea? Rabbi Menachem Genek, who's the director, CEO of OU Kosher, he wrote a piece in 1996, which I have it here in the book, where he explains that the Rav explains that the Aron is a Talmud Chacham in his Kodesh Kodashim, in his Beit Midrash. Why didn't they take the poles, the Badim? Why didn't they remove the poles from the Aron in the Beit HaMikdash time? And the answer was, because the poles symbolize portability. And a Talmid Chacham that just sits in his ivory tower, in his Kodesh Kodashim, is not going to make an impact on people. The Rav was portable. And those of us who had the zchut, the honor of driving him around, so we were like the Levium, Laseit et Aaron. We were moving him around. And he wanted to be moved around. I want to publicly thank an individual here who I'm sure does not want to be acknowledged, but I'm going to do it anyway because of Hakarat Tov. Rabbi David Shapiro, from the now here Yerushalayim, Toshav Yerushalayim, the principal of Maimonides School for so many years in Boston, for reviewing this book before the professional editors went over the book. I thought I knew English. And I discovered there's English of Brooklyn and there's English of Brookline. It's two different languages. And I'm proud to say that the book now has appeared in Brookline English, proper English, proper diction, proper grammar, and then the editors, you know, they did what they did with it and so on. Baruch Hashem. But this was just, you know, it was a gift, Mamash Min Hashamayim, that I fully appreciate for David. I have another book coming up. So I'm just going to conclude with the way I concluded the book, with the epilogue. And that was the story that the Rav himself gave a speech at a Mizrahi convention in 1957. I lifted it out of Rabbi Rek Efet's two-volume The Rav book. And I'm not going to read to you the speech, but the gist was, and this was important, he was flying from Boston to LaGuardia and ready to be picked up to be taken to the yeshiva. It was the setting of what this book was all about. And the Rav he's thinking, being 20,000 feet up in the air, about the technology of aviation, and he understands the physics, he understands how this works, but he's marveling at the human ingenuity and technology and what it's able to do. And finally the plane lands at LaGuardia, and he's picked up by somebody to be driven to the yeshiva, the halls of Abaya and Rava, where the discussions of Surah and Pumbedita, the same discussions take place. And the Rav says, I feel at home because I am grounded in eternity. Thank you very much. Let me just say, for those of you who are online and would like to purchase the book, so number one, here at the center, the book is available, the OU Center. It is available online at urimpublications.com. One word, www.urimpublications.com. And in the States, you can get it at OU Press. OU Press is a co-publisher of this book at the OU Press website, as well as on Amazon. You can get it, they'll deliver it to you as well. And that was a big surprise to me. It's available in various bookstores here in Yerushalayim, like at Pomerantz in town, and Chavruta in Katamon, in Minzer, in Somet Gush Etzion. These are places that I know that it's available. And I thank you very much for being here for this book.
Can you hold it up?
All right, we'll have Marathon one minute.
Very inspiring.
Thank you.